Hey guys, here's the last section of Chapter 5. It's called The Colonies Unite for Action. So have your PPTs in front of you and a red pen ready to take some notes if you need to add some more information. That'd be great. Well, when we last left the colonists, they had just had the Intolerable Acts slapped on them, closing the port of Boston until the Tues paid for, more quartering of soldiers, so it's pretty miserable there in Boston. Word has spread pretty rapidly throughout the colonies about what's happening in Boston, and they're actually starting to unite in a way, at least in spirit. Virginia, for example, pulls its House of Burgesses together and decides, like, well, this is going on up north, and it's going to be just a matter of time before it comes to us. Well, when the royal governor, remember that's the one appointed by the king, finds out that the House of Burgesses had done that, it dissolved it. The governor said, no, you guys can't be a House of Burgesses anymore. So they kind of worked around that and just slipped over to a nearby tavern and continued meeting secretly. So folks in Virginia, this is called their first Virginia convention. So just after England disbands the House of Burgesses, the delegates meet in secret. They decide to support the actions of Massachusetts, suggest the colonies create a Continental Congress, which they actually do, and they select people from among themselves that will represent them in the Continental Congress. There's a sketch of Raleigh Tavern where they first met at. There were subsequent meetings too in different locations. In fact, as they're discussing their participation, there's some pretty famous faces there at the Virginia Convention. You got George Washington, you got Thomas Jefferson. So these are some pretty famous people. But there's one that I need you guys to know about, and he's your number 28 of your PPTs. His name is Patrick Henry. And he gives a very famous speech here. Let me just read this to you. If you want to follow along, it's on page 84 in the yellow text box there. Here's what very tall, eloquent Patrick Henry stands up to say. They tell us that we're weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. 3 millions of people armed in the holy cause of liberty, and in a country such as we possess, are invincible by any force which our enemy can send against us. There is no retreat, but in submission and slavery. The war is inevitable, and let it come. Gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it the gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And then he took a seat. And that had a profound effect on the men in that room and their opinion there in Virginia that day. People were undecided. Nobody really liked what was going on, how the colonists were being treated, but they were undecided how to deal with it. Some thought, well, we should stick with with the British. They do give us protection. We have good trade deals with them. But others were like, no, that's not even worth sacrificing who we are for. So they were ready to break free of them. Well, Virginia's delegation and all the other colonies' delegations met in Carpenter's Hall, that's the building, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So this is begun, and every colony except for Georgia sent delegations. So your number 29, First Continental Congress is a meeting of all the colonies' delegates, except for Georgia, to try to determine what to do with what was going on with the British. So here's some things that they accomplished at this meeting. They they wrote up a document called the Declaration of Rights and Grievances, and you didn't have to define that one, but in that one, they defined the king's actions and Parliament's actions as unjust and cruel, as well as unconstitutional, and most dangerous and destructive of American rights. So they did declare their rights. They also declared that they're still loyal to the king. They want the king to know that we just want you to fix this. We don't necessarily want to leave you. We just want you to fix this. So they send this letter off. Now, of course, it takes 2 months to get a letter across the ocean, and then another 2 months to get something back. So they know this isn't going to be a quick bit of information for them. So they do make plans to meet a little bit later, several months later, for a second meeting if they don't relent. Well, we know that they didn't relent. The king has made the famous quote to his chief minister. He says, "The die is now cast." That's like a reference to when you roll the dice and the numbers are revealed. There's nothing you can do to change those numbers. It's like, the die is now cast. Colonies must either submit or triumph. I do not wish to come to severer measures, but we must not retreat. And that's King George III. So they're not going to give in. The colonists, thoroughly expect a repeal, of the Intolerable Acts, but it is not going to come. So they also, at this Continental Congress, organized something called the Continental Association, where they agreed to stop imports and exports to and from Britain. They're going to, at certain times, stop imports, and another time stop exports. And they say that we do solemnly bind ourselves to adhere to this association until such part of the several acts of Parliament passed since the close of the last war are repealed. They're talking about the Intolerable Acts. So they do have a boycott at the ready here with the Continental Association. All right, so it's going to come down. The action is certainly going to come down. Britain responds with sending more troops to more cities, especially to Boston, and they put further restraints on trade. So instead of loosening, it got tighter, got worse. So all around Boston, everybody's kind of battening down the hatches. They're storing up some ammunition and weaponry in certain places. They're calling up their youngest, most energetic men to be what are called Minutemen. And these are the young men who are to be ready in a minute's notice to fight. They keep everything at the ready by their door. Their powder, their weapon, their whatever their supplies they need are hanging by the door, ready to go. And so at a moment's notice, the Minutemen were to be ready. This is a statue there in Boston, just paying honor to the Minutemen. All right, so there are British troops in Boston. They're getting ready to move out because they learn of a stash of weapons in the little community of Concord. Now, don't confuse Lexington and Concord, North Carolina with Lexington and Concord, little communities around Boston, Massachusetts. We're talking about Massachusetts here. So the British do learn of a stash of weapons in Concord, and they're getting ready to move out. They want to get this stash of weapons, and they want to arrest a couple of guys that are the ringleaders. So they want to arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock, both very wealthy Boston men. Now, of course, they've gone into hiding, which they're not soldiers. They should go into hiding. But they also have lots of lookouts going on. So the minute they know that the British are coming toward Lexington and Concord, they send messengers out. Paul Revere, Samuel Prescott, and William Dawes run from town to town all around Boston to warn the Minutemen and everybody to be up and to arms that the British are coming. If you've not yet read the poem in literature, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, you will soon. Miss Cohen does a good job with that poem. But it is the story of this night where Paul Revere and these other men are riding around all the towns to warn them that the British are coming. I have a link here to the real story, but I'm not going to take the time to look into it now. But you have this on the test link, the Chapter 5 test link, if you're interested. Just pull up the PowerPoint and go to this slide, and that's a live link that'll take you to the real story of Paul Revere. Well, on the morning of April 18th, 1775, the British do arrive in Lexington Square, and this is like the most mysterious. We don't really know which side fired the first shot, but the first shot is fired for sure. And it's there in the town square, and we have probably 8 or 10 colonists who were killed and a few more wounded. And the British do move on. They keep marching on toward Concord, another community there around Boston. But this shot becomes known as the shot heard round the world. And it's not because you could audibly hear it, but it's because it was kind of a signal shot for all these big empires. If you don't treat your colonies well, they could rebel and fight against you. And it did kind of domino into other empires, and other, like the French had a revolution right after ours. But the very first shot of the Revolutionary War between us and Britain was fired at the town of Lexington. So make sure you have that down for number 32, Lexington. First shot of the war. This is an artist rendering of the scene in Lexington as the militia square up to the British troops for the first shots of the war. And again, we don't know whether it was the colonists firing first or the redcoats, but it was sure fired. And then on to Concord, a nearby town, looking for Samuel Adams and John Hancock, and looking for that stash of weapons. Stores here means storage, place where they're storing ammunition. So there's another skirmish at the North Bridge there as you enter Concord. The British are kind of scooping up all the weapons they can find, but of course they've been moved around. These people are quite well informed that the British were coming, so they don't get a whole lot, really. And they decide not to pursue across the bridge, this, pinch point there for the troops. So they turn around and start making their way back to Boston. Well, look at that number of British casualties, 273. And that happened the whole 20 miles or so that they had to march back to Boston from there at Concord Bridge. And surrounding towns, people came out and just jumped on them from, like guerrilla warfare, firing shots at the soldiers as they made their way back to Boston. So colonial militia from other towns harassed the British all the way back to Boston, and there were heavy casualties for the British. This makes the colonists a little bit cocky, like, we took it to the biggest, baddest army in the world, and here we are, we're still standing, and they're in Boston. Of course, they couldn't run them out of Boston. They tried, and so the British are entrenched there in Boston, just waiting for more orders, more action to happen. Well, just to wrap this section up, this really is a disagreement about core values. And this is what drove the British and the Americans apart. Our core values of freedom and equality and growth and individualism, so many of those have been violated by the British by them not treating the colonists as equal citizens. So they did not treat the colonists as equal. They didn't get representation. Like if you lived in England, you did get that. They also denied the liberties of the colonists and didn't allow the colonists the growth that they desired. With that proclamation of 1763, they told them you can't move out past the Appalachians anymore. So the wedge that's being driven between the colonists and the British have to do with the core values that are being very differently interpreted by the British and the colonists. And it just drove them to an absolute war. Now, Chapter 6 will take up that war in earnest, but it's actually underway here at Lexington and Concord. These are the first shots of the war. All right, so now you're going to check your SQ page 86. If there's time for a Kahoot, I'm not sure. Let Mr. O'Leary be the judge of that, because I do have about 30 minutes of video that I want you to see from the History Channel, from America, the Story of Us. It takes it all the way from all these actions being taken against the colonists. You'll see the Boston Massacre reenacted, the political action that takes place, thereafter trying to keep the peace, the different groups meeting in Virginia and in Massachusetts as well, what's going on, and then it finally ends with them reenacting the Lexington and Concord for you. So I really want you to see all that. I think it'll help solidify it. So Mr. O'Leary will decide if there's time for a Kahoot or not. If not, you already had one in today, so don't complain. Caleb Schlettnikov, you're like the worst to complain for Kahoots. So just zip it if you don't get to do it. If there's time to do worksheet 37 as a class after the video, you will complete that. If not, you'll need to complete that as a homework assignment to help you prep for the test. Now this is another one where you need to do it first. Do your chapter reread tonight. You need to then do your worksheet 37. Takes you through all the actions and reactions of the whole chapter. And then I did put a link on there for you to check it with. When you click on the assignment on Canvas, the answers there'll be a link there to check your answers, so you can be sure that you got those answers right to worksheet 37. So if you don't have time to complete that as a class today, you can do that for homework. I do want you to do it for homework, and then I do want you to check your answers for sure. So let me go back to the slide here. So if time, do that. Now chapter 5 test is next class on Thursday. So I need you to do your reread tonight, and you got your PowerPoint and your study guide on Canvas. Please do not skip that chapter reread tonight. You need 2 days preparation for this. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of laws and actions that you got to know. You really need to give yourself a couple days on this. So then homework will be to study. If need be, worksheet 37. Oh, wait a minute. That's 34. That's 34 that I want you to complete for homework. Sorry, back that up. 37 is a real quick one, and if we don't get it done, I did not put the answers for 37 on Canvas, but that's a real quick one to check before you take the test. It's really on just the last little part of the chapter. But 34 is all inclusive of everything. So if you don't get this done in class, it is for homework, and there's a link on Canvas to check it. You just click on the assignment and you can click open the link. All right, guys, do great on this test. I sure do miss you guys and love you very much. Hope to see you soon.